Video from my Memorial Day 2016 trip with Channel Islands Dive Adventures to San Miguel and Santa Cruz Island aboard the Conception. The first island that we hit was San Miguel. The viz wasn't great, as you can see here, but the macro life was absolutely stunning. The majority of the footage is from Wyckoff Ledge. As you can see, there was quite a bit of surge, so when people wonder why sometimes the video is a little shaky, well, especially with the macro photography, it's awful hard to stabilize. This is the same view of the ledge with a red filter on. I was maybe 80 feet down. The ledge reminds me a lot of Farnsworth Bank. I thought this was kind of a cool shot of the one metrinium anemone surrounded by the strawberry anemones. It was also covered with this substance, which looks to me to be very similar to the purple hydrocoral that you find on Farnsworth Bank. I'm not sure if this is another form of hydrocoral. Some of the other sites that we hit had the same brittle star blanket that Anacapa has. I don't know what causes this mass congregation, but as I mentioned, the real stars of this trip were the nudibranchs. And what video can I have about nudibranchs if I don't start off with probably my personal favorite, the Spanish shawl. If the graphics look a little weird, it's because for some of these shots I've used the software image stabilization, so it provides some weird rotational effects. Some shots like this one were not stabilized if I could really put my camera down on a hard surface. The Spanish shawl is pretty iconic and is one of the most common ones that you see. Its serrata, the little golden tips, are embedded with nematocysts from the anemones that it eats. This is a Hermesinda cassicornis. It's also known as an opalescent nudibranch. These are a rather cantankerous variety, and along with another species that you'll see in a minute, are actually known to be quite aggressive, and when encountering another similar nudibranch, will actually battle each other. This is the other species that I've mentioned that is quite aggressive and is very similar to the Hermesinda. This is a Philodiana hiltoni, and this is probably my favorite shot of the trip. The Philodiana hiltoni are beautiful, and as I mentioned before, are often confused with the Hermesinda cassicornis. This was actually the first time that I'd ever seen this particular species of nudibranch, and in fact, this particular shot is the first instance where I saw one. It's always exciting to see something new. This little fellow is a Doryopsila of some sort. There were quite a few of these, as is evidenced by the two that are directly next to each other. They ranged about 2 to 3 inches and were quite pretty with their white speckling. This is a Trophia catalinae. Again, this was another nudibranch that I saw for the very first time. This is also known as the clown nudibranch. And I've got the only 2 instances that I saw this particular nudibranch on this video. This is your garden variety San Diego Dorid. They get quite large for a nudibranch. Apparently they can reach lengths of up to 4 inches, and despite their common name of San Diego Dorid, their geographic reach is actually quite large, all the way up to Alaska. To me, they kind of look like bunny rabbits. You've got the rhinophores up front, which they use to smell, and the serrata in the back, which they use to breathe. Looks like a little cottontail. They're quite cute and very common. I oftentimes see them on the oil rigs in Los Angeles. This is a Catalina variant of some sort. I'm guessing it's a Luteo marginata. I'm sure I'm butchering that name. This also might be a Luteo marginata. I love the gold frilling around the side. Here's another perspective. This too kind of has that bunny rabbit look. Very, very beautiful Dorid. This was the only McParlandi that I saw. You can tell it's a McParlandi by its 3 stripes. This, I believe, is a Tritonia festiva. I saw this as I was scootering by, and I hadn't changed my camera perspective from the wide angle. Normally it's set on a narrow. This is a pair of mating sea hare. You can see the egg bundles on the sides. It's that yellow spaghetti substance. This was a batch of eggs of some sort. We really weren't quite sure what. The anemones were beautiful here and quite large. This one was maybe 6 inches in diameter. And so was this, a completely different color variation and pattern. There were also several tube anemones, like this bright orange one. This was a worm that I found. I tried to get it with a macro shot. I thought it was beautiful as it waved back and forth in the surge. I don't think my dive buddy saw this particular one. Here's a field of tube anemones. And much to my surprise, we found an entire collection of squid eggs. It's the end of May, and yet there are thousands of squid eggs that were lining San Miguel, or at least in the sandy patches. In my experience, the squid tend to mate, during the December time frame, but maybe because of now we're getting cold waters, this is why the squid eggs appeared. This particular dive was 49 degrees. I was shivering for a good 15 minutes after getting back on the boat. It was cold, even with the dry suit. This was a field of Kellett's whelk that were mating. I guess love was in the air between the squid, the sea hares, and the whelk. Very interesting to see this huge pile. And a rock crab of some variety. This is a chestnut cowrie. You can see the mantle has started to envelop the outer part of the shell. They can retract this inside the shell. Here's a collection right here of 4. This is a rock scallop that hasn't been covered in strawberry anemones like you see on the oil rigs. There were tons of lingcod of good size on this trip. One guy had a spear gun and speared one, and the flesh was actually a blue color. I thought that was very interesting. I'd never seen the flesh of a lingcod before. This was a dive site called The Markers. It had a kelp forest that in some places was so thick that it almost made it a night dive. It also gave it this really cool, eerie green glow, especially when you're inside. This is my dive buddy X coming at me with 15,000 lumens of combined lighting. We joked that he was trying to cook the fish in place. I can't wait to see how his video turned out. There were abalone absolutely everywhere. And some of the abalone were so big, like this one, that it was growing its own kelp. There were so many abalone that the joke was, oh look, there's a rock, not an abalone. And many of them were actively munching on kelp. This was an awesome experience, a free-swimming wolf eel. You can tell this one is a bit of a juvenile, or at least an adolescent, because it's a much darker color than a normal wolf eel. When I saw this, I first thought it was a moray, but then I noticed the little fins near the head, because wolf eels aren't actually eel, they're a type of fish. He or she really did not like my light. I would turn it on, it would kind of duck back a little bit, so I didn't stay and harass it for very long. I planted my strobe and dashed back to X to see if he wanted to film it, but by the time we got back, the wolf eel was gone. This was a really, really cool encounter, and surprisingly shallow. This is maybe 60 feet. But again, the cold water is something that they really like, and the water was maybe 51 degrees. One of the highlights of my trip, easily. Once we made our way over to Santa Cruz Island, the marine life and topography changed. There were quite a few of these worms everywhere. And here you can see a close-up macro shot of these worms. There was one place where they formed an entire wall. it's interesting to see the shift just going down the chain of Channel Islands. This is a tiny little fringe head that was inside of a hole in the rock. It's literally the size of my pinky finger. I wish it was in a little bit better focus, but it was really cool to see it. X and I also did a scooter dive here, and you can see the difference in the topography. What was kind of funny is that on this scooter dive, we buzzed two of our fellow divers that were macro photographers. You'll see their bubbles here in a second. We got quite close, and these scooters are fairly loud. X, as you'll see, even shines his light on the rock in front of them and on the back of their camera to let them know, hey, we're here, just saying hi and checking in. We buzzed them on the way out, we turned around, we buzzed them on the way back in. We passed within a foot or two. And when we talked to them on the boat, they had no idea we were even there. There's X shining his light. So the subsequent joke was they're probably going to get eaten by a shark. Because if they didn't know that two people on scooters buzzed right by them while shining their light on them, again, a signal to the macro photographers, they had no idea. That was pretty funny. The topography here was different. There were a series of sea caves, and X and I managed to scooter our way into one. This wasn't a normal cave that was an overhead environment. You could actually surface inside the cave, but it was really, really dark inside because you were in a cave. Some of these caves are gargantuan. One that you'll see coming up is actually called the Blimp Hangar, and the other, the Painted Cave, which we took the boat in, is the largest, or second largest, sea cave in the world. This particular one was much smaller, but it was just so neat to be in this completely dark environment. The surge was a tad bit unnerving. Here you can see a bit of the inside of the cave. This is the blimp hangar that I was referring to. You can see it's not truly an overhead environment. Here's the entrance to the Painted Cave. We took the entire Conception dive boat, a 79-foot long dive boat, into the cave. All the way into the cave. The back of the boat was completely in the cave. It was beautiful and a little smelly. All in all, this was a great trip. Channel Island Dive Adventures always does a great job. All the people on it were fantastic, and it was a wonderful time. I'm looking forward to the next adventure in the Northern Channel Islands.